2 now, where we take a deeper look at whatever it is our theme is. And we have yet to tell you folks what that is. It is terminology. So we are a podcast where we are learning as we go. Last week, we really looked at tasting beer and being able to really enjoy it. Now, this week, we're going to take a step to the side, and there's a bunch of words that we don't understand. So we'd like to ask a professional. And as Dr. Beer, we thought you'd be perfect.
Go ahead.
Dr. Beer Fairy?
So I'll start, I guess. And there are a lot of T-shirts out there that I've seen. And they have all kinds of pictures of dinosaurs on them. And then crazy beer words. One of them, diacetyl. And another being Brettanomyces. See, I don't even know how to say that.
He's a doctor. We go to the professionals.
So I'm guessing these are very different things.
These are very different things.
And then after you tell us what they could be, could you maybe tell us why they're paired up with dinosaurs?
My guess is diacetyl, just because it kind of, I guess, a spin on pterodactyl.
Right, that's what I thought.
Is probably my guess. Diacetyl is actually a compound that's made during fermentation, and all yeast makes diacetyl. Everyone's tasted it. If you've ever had artificial buttered popcorn, you've tasted diacetyl.
Like that taste.
Yeah, so that sort of buttery taste is the hallmark of diacetyl. So during fermentation, what happens is when you put the yeast in the beer to start the fermentation process, the yeast basically goes hog wild. It sees all this sugar and it sees all this food, and it basically starts to eat like crazy and starts to reproduce like crazy. And so your population just explodes. During that process, though, the yeast is going so fast that it's basically having a good party, and it's going to clean up later. It's not the best way to put it.
That guy.
And so the diacetyl is one of the compounds that's released during that process and during the fermentation process. Mm-hmm. And then as fermentation slows down, the yeast will reabsorb the diacetyl and will break it down into flavorless compounds. In a lot of beers, diacetyl is considered an off flavor, but in certain British styles, it's actually considered appropriate. And so butter is sort of the common character, but it can also come across as sort of like a butterscotch flavor as well, which is what you'll sometimes get in some different British styles. But that's what diacetyl is. Diacetyl also can come as a byproduct from infections. So there's a particular bacteria called Pediococcus, which creates a lot of lactic acid, but it also creates a lot of diacetyl. And that's actually a bacteria that's used a lot, or is found a lot, in sour beers. But it's a compound of metabolism. So
I feel like we could play a game where we could say like a dinosaur name and a random beer term, and you'd have to guess which one is which, and I would lose. I'm certain of it, but I think it would be fun.
It would be very fun. I would love to do that. We should think about that.
We should put that on the to-do list.
We'll market that, yeah. Beer trivia night. I don't know.
Well, your other question, Brettanomyces,
yes.
That actually is a type of yeast. The normal sort of brewer's yeast is called Saccharomyces, and we just tend to call it sac. Brett is shortened to Brett.
Oh, wait.
It's very, very tricky. And so, but Brettanomyces is a different type of yeast, and it will ferment sugars just like Saccharomyces does, and it will give you alcohol and carbon dioxide just like regular Saccharomyces does. But it also tends to generate a lot of different flavor compounds. All yeast, and I think the saisons here are a good example of it. I mean, this is a Saccharomyces yeast strain, but it's got a lot of character to it, where there's other, and that's a big hallmark of a beer that's often overlooked, is how much the yeast changes the flavor profile. Okay. And Brettanomyces is no different in that regard, but it tends to be wildly different than what you get from Saccharomyces. And so there's a lot of flavors that you can get from Brettanomyces. some really intense tropical fruit flavors. So pineapple's not uncommon in certain strains.
Yum.
Pretty tasty. So big juicy flavors. Kind of swinging the other way to the classic flavor descriptors of wet dog barnyard funk.
Ooh. No. It's good. I like Barnyard Funk. Like, sign me up for
and
the
people
Barnyard
people
Funk.
always say it's barnyard, but in a good way.
Yeah. And horse blanket?
Horse blanket. So I mean, these are
delicious.
So if you've walked into a barn and
Wow.
you've smelled that, that's kind of what you're getting.
Okay.
And I think the best way to equate that is it's kind of like blue cheese, where there's
Oh,
this
I love
sort
blue
of
cheese.
intense sort of character to it that is definitely unique to those types of cheeses. So that sort of funkiness, that funky character, and is often associated with Brettanomyces. And again, it's very strain dependent, just like there are lots and lots of different strains of Saccharomyces. There's lots and lots of different strains of Brettanomyces too. Some of them are intentionally added to beer. Some of them are not. And so well, sometimes and that can be the generation of something incredible. I mean, you just spontaneously fermented beers, you may have heard that term. We're across the street from Allagash. One of their very cool things that they do is they have this thing called a cool ship, which is basically a big shallow metal pan that they will put the unfermented beer into. It's called wort, and then they let it cool overnight, and the yeast that's in the air falls into it and starts the process that way, and that's how traditional lambics are made as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you can sometimes get something incredibly complex and delicious, but there's a lot more randomness to it.
Very
Right.
Who's up next?
So in the introduction, in our little bios, I said I wouldn't know, what was it, barley or malt, if it hit me in the face. So I'm the newbie to more of the technical terms and all of that. So learning about the basics, if you will. So barley. Tell us a little about.
I think they're connected.
Barley and malt.
Yeah,
Barley and
right.
malt.
So they're actually two different things from the standpoint of barley's. It's a plant. It's a cereal grain.
Okay. My
So
Fruit Loops, got it? No.
yeah, and sorry, just a big truck go by. But it's a cereal grain that grows actually really well in cooler climates. So you'll see it a lot. Most of the barley in North America is grown in like North Dakota and into Canada.
Oh, okay.
And it is harvested much like wheat. The kernels are taken off, and that's barley.
Okay.
Most of that is actually used as animal feed. The lots that are good enough will be sold to malting houses. So what malt is a cereal that's been sprouted and then dried. What that does is that takes the basic starch that's in that seed, which is what that kernel is,
Okay.
and you start growing the plant. And you start growing the plant by sprouting it. It turns the starch in there into sugars. I think most people have tasted malted barley if they've ever had a malt, so like a malt shake or malted milk, Whoppers.
Yes.
So those are all things that are sweetened with malt sugar. So that the problem for yeast that we use in brewing is that it can't break down the starch, but it can break down the simpler sugars. And so the malting process converts that starch into a usable form that the brewers can then finish the conversion process, make more sugar water, and then you can throw the yeast into it, and that's how you end up with beer.
Oh, very cool.
But you can malt wheat, you can malt rye, you can malt oats. So malt is actually the grain that's gone through that process, and then you'll often, most of the time when brewers talk about malt, they're really talking about barley malt because that's the bulk of what's used.
Okay.
But wheat malt's common. There's a lot of styles of beer that are dependent on wheat malt, or that's really the backbone of them. You'll sometimes find some sort of ancient grains that have also been malted, spelt and things like that. So, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes. Boy, that was a nice...
Would you know now the difference between barley and malt if it hit you in the face?
I would.
Good
I would.
job.
I would. Let's
We're
try
good.
it. Let's try it right now. Oh, it just hit me in the face. No. That was succinct and to the point. I like it. Cheers. Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah. That was perfect.
So I have gone over a lot of terms, and one thing that jumped out at me was ales have top fermenting yeast and lagers have bottom fermenting yeast.
There's two major sort of families of brewers' yeast, ales and lagers. Ales are really kind of the yeasts that originated in England, a lot in Belgium, a lot in sort of Western Germany. A lot of American brewing actually more came from the English school.
Yeah.
So ales tend to be, they're called top fermenting because they'll create this sort of big cap that can be very thick that sits on top of the beer. That's where it just ferments like crazy. And if you go to a traditional British brewery or British style brewery, they'll often use these big tanks that are open air, and you'll have, when they put the yeast in, you'll just see this giant, it almost looks like whipped cream kind of that forms on the top, and that's actually the yeast that's doing its thing. So that's where ales are top fermenting, sort of comes from that school. Lagers is a German word for to store. And so what lagers are is those are yeasts that really derive more in Germany, and they are used to ferment the beer, but you then age the beer for several weeks to months. And what happens is the yeast actually will start to drop down to the bottom of the tank, and it'll sit on the bottom of the tank, but it'll keep fermenting. And so it's a much slower process. It's generally done at cooler temperatures, and you get very different end results. So lagers are kind of famous for being very sort of crisp and clean and not actually having quite as much yeast character to them, where ales tend to be a lot more fruity, more expressive. And a lot of that has to do with how the temperatures are fermented at and how fast that process happens.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, thanks. That makes more sense now.
Nice.
As a bonus round, we have a sentence we would like you to... First off, it's a bonus round for Jane because she has to read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a bonus round for you so that you can try to...
Oh, dear.
She's warming up over there.
Yeah. So these terms are all in alphabetical order, and so in the A's, I found the term acid rest. And just listen to this sentence. A stage of the mashing process where phytase converts phytic acid to phosphoric acid to acidify the mash.
Yes.
Okay, Doc, what the heck does that mean?
All right. So we talked a little bit about malting. Again, a lot of this stuff comes from sort of these historical practices. And back when this, brewing and still very much brewing is a craft that you sort of learn from someone else and is sort of passed down. But the science is obviously a lot better developed now than it was 200, 300 years ago.
Right.
But what the acid rest was when you would malt barley, a lot of breweries used to do that themselves. And there's still some Scottish distilleries that will malt their own barley. And that process may not be as efficient as it is now. There was these steps where you would take a mash, and all the mash is where you take your grain that you're going to turn into beer and you mix it with water.
Oh,
all right. So think oatmeal but thinner. That's about the best way to describe it.
Got it.
Yep.
And so when you mash something, what you're doing is you're hydrating the malt and you're releasing all these enzymes, and all this activity starts to happen in the mash. The goal is to turn your starches into sugars so that you can then ferment it and create beer. But part of that too is that that tends to happen better at certain acidities. And so your mash pH is one of the variables that can give you very different end results. So an acid rest was a stage where you would take the malt and you would start the mash process, and that reaction would start to make it more acidic. And then that subsequently makes the conversion of the starch to sugar more effective. So that was a really long answer for what is an acid rest. But
No, that is good, and I'll go back and listen to your answer.
it's acid rests are something that's actually not done a whole lot anymore. I mean, it's still something that will be done in some traditional, particularly like German style brewing practices, but it's because malting now has gotten to be